The amount of information has increased. I'm sure you've witnessed it yourself. Most likely you receive more emails today than you did 5 years ago, and a lot more than you received 10 or 15 years ago. The trend, of course, is in the direction of more and more information. Now, we're not going to stop this trend. You won't, I won't, most likely, and we collectively will most likely not stop this trend. The question, therefore, is how can we deal with information as effectively, as efficiently as possible? And I'd like to give you quite a few recommendations. And they're quite, it's a wide variety of different types of recommendations. The first recommendation is very basic, and that is to ideally only leave fingerprints on a piece of paper once. Now, what's behind this? Of course, it's not about the fingerprints themselves or the proof that you had something in your hands, but rather the approach to avoid looking at things 20–30%, but not fully covering it so that you can put it aside. What I mean by that is I often distinguish between, let's say, reading something 100%, which doesn't necessarily mean that you read every line or every sentence or every word, but you look at it enough in order to be able to decide whether it's something you just need to file, or it's something that requires an activity, or it's something that's not relevant and you can throw out. That's what I mean by 100% reading in this context. Or the other thing that might be reasonable is just to read headlines, like the subject line of emails, just to get an overview and to decide what you're going to do next. Let's call that 5% reading. But everything in between usually costs a lot of time without being terribly beneficial. So let's say somebody reads something, it's a 10-page document, and sort of reads into it, reads a page or two and goes, oh, that's really interesting. I'll put that aside. We should do something. I'll put it aside until I have a lot more time. Now, when's this point in time going to come when you have a lot more time? Most likely, never. So my recommendation is to try and only touch things, only leave fingerprints on things literally, or if it's electronic information, figuratively, once, and decide as quickly and as decisively as possible whether something belongs into the category of requires an action, you need to do something, which could simply mean you pass it on to somebody else, or actually complete the task yourself. That's one possibility. The other possibility is you need to file it, you need to put it someplace, you need to save it someplace, you need to put it in a folder. So you need to, let's call it, file it. And the third possibility is that it's not relevant or not relevant enough so that you should keep it, so you simply throw it out or delete it. But the main message is decide as quickly as possible and ideally only look at things once. Of course there are exceptions, but as well as possible, try and only look at things once and only leave fingerprints on a document once, ideally. How often do you check your emails? The second question I have is, how often should you check your emails? How often should you check your emails if you want to be as productive as possible? And then the question is, are the answers the same? For most people, the answer is they actually check their emails a lot more often than they should in order to be optimally productive. Now, how often per day should you check your emails? For some people, it's good enough to check their emails once or twice a day. For a lot of people, it's good enough to check their emails 3, 4, 5 times a day. Other people feel and really should, based on their responsibility, check their emails about once every hour. And there might be certain functions, there are certain functions where people need to constantly check their emails. But a lot of people I've met over the years check their emails a lot more often than they really need to. And often we convince ourselves that we need to check our emails all the time. The question is, why is it that people check their emails a lot more often than they really need to, or than it really makes sense to do so? Well, one motive, a very strong motive, is that people simply are curious. To give you a little bit of evidence about how curious people are and how much that influences behavior, on our website, not the website of my organization, and you don't need to check it out, that part of the website does not exist anymore. For a while we had a part of the section of the website that was not quite finished yet, but it was already published, and an employee of mine, for the meantime, called it "Do Not Click." Now, you can guess which part of the website was the only part that basically every visitor clicked on. Now, why is it? Not because of the benefits behind it or the value that it promises, but rather because we are curious. So, what I'd like to ask you to do is to seriously ask yourself the question, weighing quick response, being informed on the one hand, and on the other hand, being proactive and deciding what you're going to do and not be pushed around by other people and other people sending you messages by email. What is a good compromise between these two conflicting interests? That means, in other words, how often is it reasonable for you to check your emails? It might be once a day. It might be twice a week only. That's kind of rare. It might be once an hour. But even if you decide that it's once every hour, or every time you've completed a task, a major task, which could be after 20 minutes, could be after 2 hours, whatever you decide, try and stick to it. And really try and do it. It's very much worthwhile. It increases your productivity and it decreases your level of stress. So gives you a step forwards, an advantage in both major areas of time management. Good time management, in my opinion, is good. Time management is good when we have a very high productivity and a fairly low level of stress. All other combinations are conceivable, of course. High level of productivity, high stress, low level of productivity, low stress, or a dangerous combination, low productivity, high stress level. And preferably, you want to spend as much time with a high level of productivity and low stress level. And email plays a key role within these two dimensions. The topic of folders and subfolders, for instance, in your inbox. Some people have defined additional subfolders and other people don't use it. You don't have to, but I find it very, very useful to do so. Not 500 subfolders and subfolders thereof, but for instance, I have 5 main subfolders and 2 additional ones. 5 are based on categories, based on topics. Then I have a CC folder. That means all emails that I received as a CC recipient, where it was only on copy. And then I have a private folder. So to be exact, it's 7 main folders, and some of them, about half of them, I think it's 3 of them to be precise, have again subfolders, but not more than 3 is the maximum additional subfolders on the next level. 3 of them have a maximum of 2 or 3 additional subfolders. It's not about the exact number, but the advantage is that if you have subfolders and you're looking for something, all you have to do is look in the respective subfolder. It saves you time. It's a way of organizing information. Sometimes it's useful, whether it's in your inbox or the server that you're working on, or your personal computer if you have data stored locally, is to put numbers in the beginning of the name of the folder, like 1 dash or 1 underscore, and then the actual description of the content. And then the next one is 2 underscore, and then description of whatever's in that folder. What's the advantage? Well, then you, by defining numbers, you can define which order you want the folders to be in. And the advantage thereof is those folders that you use more frequently, you can put further up, and those that you use less frequently further down. And a small side effect is that after a while you know exactly that information is in folder 314. And if somebody asks you where is it, you can say it's in 314. That's often easier to remember or easier to communicate than to describe the details of where it is in form of not numbers but a description of the folder names. So my recommendation is that you spend a little bit of time defining folders and subfolders and giving them very useful names in order to save time when searching for information. Again, something simple that some people make good use of and some people just don't use. And you don't have to use it. You'll get through your business life successfully without using what I'm getting to, and that is using rules. Rules within your inbox so that certain emails, like from certain recipients, certain senders, you're the recipient, certain emails from certain people go into a certain subfolder automatically. You can define that everything that comes from a certain person goes into a certain subfolder. You can define that everything that comes from a particular organization, no matter which person at that organization sent the email, goes into a certain subfolder. You can, as I indicated just a couple minutes ago, define that everything that you become as a copied recipient, not the main recipient, goes into a certain subfolder. That's something I use, for instance. You can define that every email that has a certain word or combination of letters in the subject line goes into a certain subfolder. So there are lots and lots of possibilities. You can say that everything that comes from your boss automatically turns blue, for instance, or whatever. There are a lot of possibilities. Not all the possibilities are useful. The point is, if you have certain rules that lead to certain emails going to subfolders automatically, imagine you coming back after having been absent and you have, let's say, 84 new emails. And let's say 4 out of those 84 emails are on a particular topic. Now, if out of the 84 emails, those 4 are number 12, number 27, number 52, and number 81, you're probably not going to notice at one glance that there are 4 emails on the topic. So if you don't have rules, then you go through those emails chronologically, is the way most people go through their emails, and jump from one topic to another, and then finally you're at email 81 and you realize the topic has already been taken care of, for instance. Now, if those 4 emails automatically went to a certain subfolder, and let's say that subfolder has 12 emails in it, 4 of which are on this particular topic, it's much easier to see within 4 out of 12, rather than 4 out of 84, that those 4 belong together. And then you can look at the most recent one first and see whether the topic has been taken care of, or just scroll down in the history and take care of it within that email, look at the email history and take care of the topic if it's not been dealt with so far. So I strongly recommend to look at what kind of rules you can use to make your life a little bit simpler and use the software to help you put things that belong together in one category. What we've talked about so far is that we receive a lot of information and talked about how we can deal with it optimally. What we sometimes forget is that we're not only the recipient of information, but also the person sending out information. And my general tip and recommendation is to be a good example. Now, I'll be more specific than that. But first I want to say that here as well, as with a lot of other topics, if you set a positive example, a part of your behavior will, positively speaking, rub off onto other people, especially if you're those people's boss. But even if you're not the head of the department or division or the company, your behavior does have an influence on other people. Now, to be more specific, for instance, I recommend to ask yourself the question whether really all the people that you had thought about just now need to receive this email. If you send an email to not 5 people, but rather 10 people, first of all, twice as many people received an email. You just created twice as much volume if we look at all the recipients together. By the way, the likelihood that somebody's going to take care of the topic decreases the more people you send it to. That just as a side note. Then I strongly recommend to use a subject line that is useful for the recipient. Okay? I still get emails sometimes, it's an exception, but sometimes I still get emails without a subject line, or it says something that doesn't have any real meaning. And here as well, I suggest to set a positive example, to write down what it's about. And if you're going to write an email about 3 topics, then put all 3 topics in the subject line. The easiest way to do that, to make sure that your subject line is a good subject line, is that you write the email first and then write the subject line second, which might be counterintuitive, but let's say you don't do it that way and you write down topic A in the subject line, and then you write something about topic A in the actual email body, and then you write something about B and write something about C. Most people do not then check the subject line again and add subject B and subject C. If you write the email body first and then write the subject line, on average the quality of the subject line will be higher. Then the best recommendation I've ever received when it comes to communicating by email efficiently is to write every email in a 2-step process. The first step, you write a brief summary of the subject matter. I'm not talking about the subject line, but a brief summary, could be a sentence, could be 5 sentences. In any case, you write a brief summary of what it's about, what you want from the person. Then, in the second step, you leave the rest out. Now, this is a little bit with tongue-in-cheek, but I am serious as well, and that is that very often people write very elaborate emails, although things could be expressed in a much shorter form. And there is a correlation between the length of the email you send and the length of the email that somebody sends back. And I'm not referring to the history that's copied back, but rather the amount of text that the other person writes in response to what you wrote. Of course, there are exceptions. You ask a simple question, get a very long answer, or vice versa. But there is a correlation between how much text you send and how much text you receive, and therefore need to read afterwards. So what I'm basically saying is try and be a little bit more aware of how you can write things, how much you need to write, who needs to receive this information, and limit that. Just be a little bit more aware, a little bit more conscious when you are in the role of the person sending out, spreading information. The topic of file names might not be the most exciting topic on the planet, but often it costs people a lot of time to find a file just because the person who saved the file did not spend even 5 seconds thinking about what the name of the file should be. So my recommendation is very, very simple. Spend just a few seconds thinking about, firstly, that's more basic, where the file should be saved and what would be a good name for the file. There aren't very many hard and fast rules, but if you ask yourself the question consciously, how should I name the file so that somebody else will understand what's in the file without having to open the file, then I'm sure you will find good file names. And that's exactly what I recommend to do, because it'll make everybody who needs the file, everybody else's life, everybody who is involved and needs that file, those people's life simpler by reducing the amount of time it takes them to find the correct file. A very quick and simple tip, especially for people who use Outlook and other people who have an email program that has a similar function. This is a function that most people don't even know, aren't aware of. It's a cleanup function. What does that mean? Let's say you and I sent emails back and forth on the same subject matter, and it's gone back and forth numerous times. Let's say you received 5 emails of mine and I got an answer 5 times. So you have 5 emails that I sent you, and every time the history of the email is part of the most current email that you received. Once you've received email number 5, there's no point in holding on to email 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, you could delete them manually because the information is redundant. All the information is contained in email 5 in the history of email 5. And that's exactly what the cleanup function in Outlook does. It deletes all redundant information. Now, let's say that email 3 included an attachment, and the attachment was not attached to, that file was not attached to email number 5. What does Outlook do? If you use the cleanup function, it deletes only number 1, 2, and 4. In other words, it keeps number 3 because there was an attachment, and it keeps number 5 because that's the only email that contains the whole information of the email bodies, the whole email correspondence. It's a very, very simple function. You can use it either to simply clean up your inbox if you want to get rid of a lot of redundant information to free up some space, or simply have fewer emails that you have to search in through your eyes or electronically. The other situation where the cleanup function can be very useful is you come back from, let's say, a 2-day trip, you have whatever, 80, 100, 400 emails in your inbox. Use the cleanup function, and again, even with the emails that you have not read so far, it will delete all the emails that are redundant, because sometimes people discussed certain topics and you were on copy all the time, and the topic is over and done with. And even if it's not over and done with, there's no point in you looking at all the emails that you could cover by just looking at the most recent email and reading it from start to finish, or first looking at the most current one, and then if it's not taken care of already, the topic is not obsolete so far, then look at the email from the beginning on, look at the history. In any case, the cleanup function is a very powerful function, and I strongly recommend to use it. The next topic is, and the last topic is, become a computer pro. I'm not really serious about it in a literal sense that everybody needs to become an expert on how to use a computer, how to use your software. But it does make sense to be just slightly better informed than the average user. And I'd like to encourage you to do a few things. One is to look at shortcuts. Now, I could go through all the shortcuts, but we can also provide you with a list very easily. Look at the combinations of the Windows button plus an individual letter, or the Control button plus an individual letter. I think just about everybody knows how to copy a text and paste it. But there are a lot of other shortcuts that are very, very useful. And in 9 out of 10 situations, you will be significantly faster by not using your mouse, but rather using the shortcuts. And very concretely, if you print out a list of shortcuts, and as I said, we can provide you with a list very easily, then my recommendation is not that you try and memorize all of them at once, but rather just take 1 or 2, maximum 3, and start using them. And once you've you start using them automatically without having to think about it anymore, just like you use copy-paste automatically, most likely. You will start using other shortcuts automatically. And then just take another 1 or 2 or 3. And then take another 1 or 2 or 3. And after a while, you'll wonder how you could ever work without all these shortcuts. The second recommendation I'd like to give you, and this is a real quick win and a big, big time saver, and that is the possibility to only have to type, let's say, 2 or 3 letters and have that automatically turn into a whole word or numerous words, a whole sentence, a whole paragraph, or a link. How can you use this, first of all? And then I'll tell you how you can do it. I'll first show you the benefit. Let's say there's only a certain number of ways that you address somebody when you write an email. So it could be Dear Mr. You could use an abbreviation like DM for Dear Mr. Or you could use an abbreviation for a particular link. Or you could use an abbreviation for your company name, etc., etc. I have abbreviations for different cities. I travel a lot. I have abbreviations for, as I said, links, for certain words like participant or people building my organization or human resources development, HRD. Type that, turns into human resources development automatically. And that saves a lot of time. I even have abbreviations for certain paragraphs, sometimes numerous paragraphs that I write repeatedly. Let's say I am preparing for a seminar or preparing for a speaking engagement. Then there are certain things that I always send my client. And certain formulations won't even give you the details. And if I write PREP for preparation, and then, for instance, a P, and then an E for P for power reading, another P that is, and then an S for seminar. So PREP, prep, P for power reading, S for seminar. That's just 6 letters if I've counted correctly. And that turns into a whole long text covering all the relevant topics. Of course, there are individual things I have to plug in to customize, and things I sometimes take out, like if I don't need a hotel booking for the night before or the night thereafter, I take that sentence out. So, given quite a few examples, you're probably asking yourself, how can I do that? Well, there are programs that enable you to do so, to plug in abbreviations, but even without installing any additional software, in the Microsoft Office products and a lot of other products, you can use the auto correction function, or you can misuse it. That's not what it was intended for, but you know that function where let's say a common typing error, like instead of the T-H-E, it's T-E-H, and the T-E-H automatically turns into T-H-E, because that's a very common typing error. Well, you can misuse the autocorrective function, for instance, in Outlook or in Word, and plug in mistakes that aren't really mistakes, and put in certain combinations of letters that then turn into something bigger, which could be a word, a sentence, a link, or much more than that. And the good thing about that last tip is it's a real quick win, it's a real time saver for every email you write in future, and you don't have to ask anybody, you don't have to ask a boss, you don't need any new software. It's a very simple time saver, and I strongly recommend that you take the time and implement abbreviations that'll make your life when typing just a little bit easier and by making things a little bit faster. So as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you a question, and that is, when is time management good time management? Well, I'll give you a train of thought from my side. And that is, in my opinion, time management is good time management when your productivity is as high as possible and your stress level is as low as possible. Now, nobody's always going to spend their time in this combination of high productivity and low stress level. And there's nothing wrong with stress, and there's nothing wrong with productivity not always being at a peak. But the question is, how much time do you spend in each of those combinations? How much time do you spend at a high level of productivity and a high level of stress? How much time do you spend in the area of both being low? How much do you spend here and how much time do you spend here? And the more time you spend here, high productivity, low stress level, the better your time management. Another way of looking at things is the question, how much time do you spend with things that are important versus not so important, not so valuable? And how much time do you spend with tasks that are urgent versus things that are not so urgent? And in most time management courses, people will tell you, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody else, that's not the point of my message at this point, people will tell you that you need to spend as much time as possible in the combination important and urgent. I don't believe that to be valid. I don't believe that to be useful advice. I believe that the goal is to spend as much time as you can with things that are important, but not urgent or not urgent yet. I believe that is the target, that is the goal of optimal time management. That just as a quick train of thought as we wrap up. And the last thing I want to say is, whenever I work with people, whether it's a small group, whether it's a large audience, whether it's an intense 1-day, 2-day seminar, whether it's just a quick keynote, I always have two goals. And even also when it's virtual, like the two of us, through technology, and we don't even see each other personally, I always have two goals. One is to provide very useful information, time-saving tips that actually work, that actually help. I hope I've been successful at doing so. And the other thing is that you chuckled a few times, you had a good time, you were entertained a little bit here and there, and I hope that I was successful at doing that. So, all the best, and I hope this was a contribution to an even higher level of time management that means even higher productivity and slightly lower level of stress.